What would your opinion be on a dictator who uses their power for good? It's an interesting question. You rarely see that in dictators. And by good, I mean like a unanimous good that everyone who is affected by it is benefited by. That type of good. The whole morally 100% yes, this is helping everybody good. How would you, honestly? And what if I told you that from 1928 to 1935, there was a de facto dictator over Louisiana who did just exactly as I described. The man's name was Huey Pierce Long. Now, I'm not gonna go over his childhood, as that would take up precious time that we really don't have for this. And also, it really isn't important. But all you need to know is that in 1928, he ran for governor of Louisiana and won. Now, a very important thing to remember for this is that Louisiana at the time was almost certainly the worst off state in the Union. It had over 60% of its people in poverty, had terrible infrastructure, and before long came around, most public officials did hardly anything about it. Huey Long did many things for the state of Louisiana. One of the first was that he made elementary school textbooks free for students. As well as that, he did night literary classes for people who didn't know how to read. Now, of course, as with anything Huey Long related, he passed these through intimidation, coercion, stuff like that. Which again raises the question, if people use unsavory means to do savory things, is it still good that they did those things? That is really the question I'm raising here. He also massively bolstered Louisiana's infrastructure, as before that, a lot of small towns were almost completely isolated by the swamps, and he had nearly 15,000 miles of infrastructure built for the state. In 1930, Huey Long decided to run for the Senate, and stated that if he didn't win the Senate election, that would mean people were unhappy with him as governor, and he would resign. And would you believe it, he legitimately, might I add, won 57% of the vote. When his governorship ended, he decided not to run again, and instead put someone loyal to him on the seat of the governorship in Louisiana. Now, of course, this man would do anything Huey asked for, so Huey remained with his effective control over the entire state of Louisiana while still being in the Senate. He also built a state capitol building for Louisiana that, to this day, is still the tallest in all of the country. Now, of course, when talking about Huey Long, I would be remiss to not mention his Share the Wealth program, which was easily his most popular program, his most well-known program across the country, his most controversial, and his most radical. Essentially, what it did is it would give every citizen $5,000 in then money, a radio, and a car, if I'm correct. And essentially, the way it would be paid for is capping annual income, capping annual inheritance, and just making sure no one can hoard too much money. And it would be used to pay for so much for the country. That was what really made Huey Long popular in the whole of the country. In fact, at the peak of his popularity, he got 60,000 letters in 1 week, which was more than FDR got at that time. Sadly, with millions joining Share Our Wealth clubs and millions supporting Huey Long, of course, he would have a lot of enemies, and sadly, September 1935, he was gunned down in the Louisiana state capitol, thus ending the story of one of the most controversial yet most interesting figures in American politics to date.